1st of November 2024. We're here for a work session of the City Council, and we will begin with public comment on non-agenda items. If there's a member of the public who wishes to speak to the council, you can stand up in the room. Wherever you're at, we'll look at you. Okay. All right, we're going to close public comment and hop right into the work session, which is Municipal Matters Roundtable. So thank you, legislators, for being here. We're really thankful that you took the time to sit with us, and I'm going to turn it over to the city manager.
Good evening, everybody. The clerk has asked me to remind you all that there is food and beverages, and we invite you to eat as much as you would like so that nobody gets hangry, right? So sandwiches over there, cold drinks on the table over here, and then you've got warm drinks, coffee, hot tea over here if you want. And please help yourself and throughout the session. For department heads, I just sent you the digital file so that we can prioritize the hard copies for our current and incoming elected officials. And Brennan, if you would email the second half of the digital packet to them. Did you do that? Okay. I just emailed you about it, so I wanted to make sure you saw it in your inbox. Okay. All right, I think we're ready to go. Councillor Richardson, I also emailed you the digital half of the packet. Hello. And you'll receive a second email from Brandon Owen with the other portion.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for being here tonight, everybody. We have, oh boy, an agenda that looks like this for the evening. The city council members will be jumping in as they feel appropriate and when they'd like to interject, but I'll kind of spearhead our conversation tonight. We hope to share some information with you about city financial outlook and the policy priorities of the city from this past year. In January, the new council will retreat mid-January and establish goals and priorities for the upcoming calendar year or two. So we'll be taking a retrospective look at 24 to kick off tonight. Then we wanted to bring to your attention just some legislative committee bills that we've been watching the last few months that we think are of interest to us and potentially to you. And then you forwarded your questions to us ahead of this meeting. And so we've put together some information to address the questions that you submitted about a month ago. So policy priorities for the city of Laramie were incorporated under 5 areas of focus as determined by the city council. Under those 5 areas, which you can see listed on the screen, there were 26 specific objectives. We just sat down about a week and a half ago and looked back at the past year. 19 of our objectives were achieved at a 90% completion rate or greater, although that can be a little bit misleading simply because, as you know, I say to the city council, Rome wasn't built in a day, nor was Laramie, nor will Laramie be built in a day. So as you well know, complex public policy problems often take multiple calendar or fiscal years to achieve, and in some cases, it's decades of ongoing work to stay abreast of changing conditions in the community. 6 of our objectives were at 50% or less, and 1 was delayed entirely, and that's actually related to a state project, which is the forthcoming reconstruction of Snowy Range Road by the Wyoming Department of Transportation. When council set their goals in January of 24, we were under the impression that WYDOT would begin planning for that really important reconstruction project this year. And it turns out they've delayed that in their pushed it out a few years. And so for that reason, there was limited progress, but I believe this will continue to be a priority for the city because the potential to really revision Snowy Range Road and to really integrate some great community amenities, non-motorized transportation, et cetera, into WYDOT's rebuilding of the roadway is very tantalizing and would coincide with longstanding plans of the city over many decades. There is a detailed report of the progress on those 26 objectives in the hard copy report that you received here. I'm not going to speak more to it than that, but I would invite the city. I am going to hit a couple high points, and then I'll invite the city council to jump in if they'd like to raise anything to your attention. So a couple high points from the 24 goals. What's going on at the city, I hate to say revolutionary, that's a pretty dramatic term, but I think what is going on at the city right now in terms of modernizing our enterprise resource planning software really is revolutionary. And I showed you the picture over here of a 2000, late 1990s desktop. You guys remember how that looked? It's the little screen in Windows 2000. Well, we have been up until February of this year operating on legacy software, literally purchased, I think, if I remember correctly, in 1999 to run all of our business operations internal to the city and also for our front customer-facing portals, if you will, through our website and that sort of thing. So we went live in February of 24 with the first of many phases of implementing the new Tyler Enterprise Resource Planning software. This is absolutely revolutionizing how we do business internally. You can imagine we're a $100+ million corporation. We process hundreds of thousands of transactions annually, payroll, all of that. This has really just taken us to 2023, I guess. So that's pretty phenomenal. We are moving now into, well, we just launched the second phase, which is for permitting. And you'll hear a little bit more about that later in the process. But I want to point out that that's the first of our customer-facing interfaces. And so our business community is now able to interface and submit applications digitally for the first time ever. And then we'll be moving into human resource management, risk management, and ultimately customer-facing portals. So for instance, all of you are probably utility customers of the city. Within a few years, you're going to be able to go online, look at your water utilization, understand how to do that, and interact with your city utility bill in a way that helps you to control your own costs, that gives you history, really sort of what we all expect when we interact with a modern corporation, whether it be private or public. So it's revolutionary, in my opinion. It's super exciting and has really increased our efficiencies. This project is enormous. It'll take us 5 years to implement all of these various pieces of software. It's the culmination of a 5+ year effort that's been underway to improve our efficiency through the use of technology. And this is the big whopper project that will just sort of put the big red bow on all of the efforts that have been going on for the last 5 years. What's interesting about this, I think, is that we will see tremendous efficiency gains, as I've mentioned, internal to our organization and for our municipal corporation, but it's also going to reap benefits externally. So our private sector clients and customers are able to be more efficient too. And like I said, Derek's going to talk to you a little bit more about just what we've experienced in the last month or two with the implementation of our permitting software and the front-facing element for our customers. That was a significant public policy goal over the last 2 years, and it will continue to be a policy goal until full implementation, probably 2 or 3 years out. Council was also really focused on enhancing accessibility throughout the community in a host of ways. We have secured a grant through the Wyoming Department of Transportation and should be putting out a request for proposal any day now to engage a consultant to come in and help us to really create a comprehensive public transportation plan for the city of Laramie that augments what's already available in a limited way through the University of Wyoming and through the Epson Center for Seniors Paratransit program. We also tried out a new technology in the public works arena this summer by trying to improve some walkability and safety in the downtown. So if you're walking around down there and it looks like somebody came in and shaved off the corner of a piece of concrete, well, they did. And the reason for that is to make that a safer space. We have a lot of heaved sidewalks and not matching seams between sidewalks and curb and gutter, and those are tripping hazards and become, they're hazardous in good weather and of course become more difficult for people to traverse in difficult weather. So we found that to be a low-cost way to improve walkability and accessibility. We're also installing in this upcoming year Laramie's first all-inclusive playground, which I consider an accessibility element. Also, we've launched the Neighbors Helping Neighbors program with Snow Angels being signed up through the volunteer software that's the council commissioned and connected with needy people in the community who need help keeping their sidewalks clear, so that we make sure people can be safe getting across those sidewalks, but also try to do that in a low-touch way for people who have special needs and need volunteers. So if you would like to be a snow angel, our volunteer software app can be downloaded in the App Store. I feel like an infomercial. It's Causer, C-A-U-S-E-R, and you can sign up to be a snow angel. Or if you know somebody who needs help in that regard, they can go in as well and sign up to receive volunteer services. And I heard through the grapevine that the Laramie Commission on Disabilities has commissioned some swag for snow angels. So there might be a freebie in it too. Lastly, Public Works has just completed, and we should be receiving data soon, on a LiDAR assessment of all sidewalks in Laramie. And you can imagine we have, 400 miles, probably 180 times 2.5? Yeah. 200 plus some mile, or 300 plus some miles, of sidewalk, which under state statute and then mirrored in local municipal code is the maintenance responsibility of the adjoining property owner, not the city. So we are assessing through this LiDAR technology the integrity of all of those sidewalk surfaces so that we can prioritize them in terms of worst to best, and then start allocating, if we can find the resources for it, start being able to allocate some public resources toward addressing the worst, least accessible, most problematic areas of sidewalk. And that's a similar methodology and program for how we manage our street system. Council, did you want to add anything on accessibility?
Councilors, anything? Legislators, do you have any questions at this point? Or anything?
Laser? Light, yeah.
Light detection and ranging.
It's a cool laser thing. That's the city manager way of explaining it.
Isn't it also what we used to?
It's very similar. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So every road has a fixed score, right? So same.
You had to do that one question.
Yep.
With the plan for advanced public transportation, you mentioned the university center. Is the plan to work collaboratively with those entities and develop a common plan, or is it to augment areas that are lacking with their?
Well, I think the answer is yes to all, but I will tell you, when we wrote the grant, we wrote it with our what we call technical partners, which are the current operators, the University of Wyoming and the Epson Center. They wrote letters of support for it. We also, we used to have, some of you in the room may remember that in 2007 or 8, the county and city jointly propped up an Albany County Transportation Authority, which is a statutory entity that can oversee transportation in the county. ACTA had become dormant, so we went back to the county and asked them to reestablish ACTA, which they've done. ACTA has just become fully appointed and will be meeting, and my intention and the council's intention is, although the city is a grant recipient, we will work with ACTA as really our guiding body. And then ACTA bless whatever plan comes forward, and then the county commissioners and the council hopefully as well. Our technical partners to ACTA are the operators. And moving to the second part of your question, I think it's known fairly widely, but the University of Wyoming and Epson Center receive some federal pass-through funds from USDOT or federal highways through WYDOT to help them operate those services. A piece of what UW offers is public transportation, right? Anybody in town can get on their bus that goes downtown. What we'd like to do is augment that. We don't want to obviously duplicate resources. We don't need that, but we'd like to augment that, extending it into other parts of the community that are underserved. What could become complex in the future, though, having this plan will enable us with a plan to maybe access operating money. But what WYDOT is telling us right now is that the operating money available to Albany County and Laramie as a non-entitlement federal city is fully allocated to the current operators, right? So we don't want to take their money away, but having a plan, we hope, will open up doors to find additional revenue. And you might recall that ACTA in 2008 or 9 did put a mill levy tax on the ballot, which barely failed. that would maybe create some local resources to extend routes and then sustain them in the future. Yep, you're welcome. Okay.
Councilor Richardson.
Hey, thank you. Would you mind, Janine, when a question is asked, I know it's going to add a little extra time, but would you mind repeating it? I can't hear.
Repeating the ACTA question and the transportation.
Any question that's asked, like from the back of the room, I can't hear them.
Absolutely.
I figured out what that question was, but moving forward, if you wouldn't mind, that would be fantastic.
And I could have also used my mic like I am now. That would have been.
Oh, that's very helpful. Perfect.
Good job, everybody. We got there. All right, city manager, back to you.
All right, wonderful. Then just kind of wrapping up, maybe priorities. There we go. Also, goal priority objectives from last year was, as always, right, the city of Laramie is always super aggressive at grant seeking because our local resources are limited, and this becomes kind of a force multiplier where we can take matching money and maybe turn it into a 3-to-1, 5-to-1, 7-to-1 return on investment. So in the last 12 to 18 months, we've secured $19 million in grants to satisfy city council objectives, activities, and just sustain the services of the city, largely focused around infrastructure, public safety, and parks and recreation. We're also working now to apply for some grant funding through EPA that might help us to expand our recycling services. We get a lot of feedback about the fact that recycling in Laramie is great, and we know we're one of 3 communities in this state that even offers recycling, so that's kind of cool, but people still say it's not enough. They want more recycling opportunities. So cross your fingers and call EPA if you have friends and tell them to support our grant. That's the end of priorities for 2024. Although I feel like I missed a slide. Let me go back. No, I did not. Okay. Any questions for the council or for any of the staff members on what we've been working on last year?
Representative Sherwood, go ahead.
Look at this. Hi. So I know that funding for EMS is a statewide topic in terms of not having enough. So I'm just wondering about sustainability or the capacity. How are we looking here in Laramie or even countywide on funding for EMS services?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way that the city of Laramie views EMS, and the chief is here, and I may ask him to weigh in as well, but we have 2 business units under the umbrella of emergency medical services. And our primary core mission business unit, as you all would suspect, is emergency medical service ambulance 911 response. Then we also have a historical relationship with a hospital where we transfer their patients to outlying facilities, which is almost exclusively on the Front Range, Colorado, and in Cheyenne. Although we have been known to move patients to other states besides Colorado and throughout the state of Wyoming, in addition to Cheyenne. So we've been working with Ivinson to figure out how we sustain those services, Representative Sherwood. The city will be continuing our core mission, but it looks like right now in the conversations we're having with the hospital that likely Ivinson is going to take in-house the patient transfer aspect or business unit. They think that they can perform that more cost-effectively than the city can. We did invite a consultant in last year to analyze. We jointly invited them in to analyze and look at how this operates. That consultant told us that the current model that we have had for 20 years is the most cost-effective for the service area, which although we're a city operation, we serve all of Albany County. But the hospital folks really think that they can do it better and cheaper. So I think we're going to, we told them recently we'd like to start building toward that, and likely we're looking right now, fall of 25 or later, depending on, when it's going to work for the hospital, we'll be transitioning that business unit to the hospital side. Did that answer your question? Sustainability in our core function, to get a little bit more to that part of your question, we have absolute sustainability, in my opinion, in our core mission. The problem is patient transfer has really been a growing business. And at this point, the city council have authorized $1.3 million, I think, Dan, to plug holes in funding for the patient transfer business unit. And so that's why I think if the Ivinson can do it cheaper for everybody, then we're we're gonna take them up on that, and hopefully that's going to be the best, cheapest way of providing that service for everyone countywide.
Thank you.
Dan, did you want to add anything?
Very much covered it.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Gary, did you have a question to add too?
Yeah, but on the hospital
Mm-hmm.
ambulance service, I know there was communication going back and forth without getting into details, but
Yeah.
the last communication was from the city to the hospital, right? Ending the conversation, saying that it's best just that we go our separate ways. Is that true?
Well, yeah, so we've been talking about this now for, 2 years almost. And when we met with the hospital in September, we were told by the folks up there that they could do it cheaper. And so when we went back and evaluated, that's when we have just recently said, okay, if that's what you can do, then we're going to let you, because we can't do it cheaper. And it's costing the city more and more every year. And that more and more work in that business unit of transferring patients is taking away and eroding the city's response times for fire response and for core 911 ambulance. So,
And the hospital did offer a pretty good sum of money to the city to help with that service, right? Without getting into the details.
yeah, and I think that's fair. The hospital did offer funding, but they did not offer funding that the consultant had established as the needed amount of funding for us to cover our costs on the patient transfer portion of the service. What they offered was below what an independent group said we needed to cover those costs and break even. And then, of course, we're weighing that against the future demand for service, which when you look historically, the demand for service for patient transfer has increased, 8+% per year for many years. And I think part of the problem, if you want just my opinion from a business standpoint, in the partnership with the hospital manages entirely and controls entirely the demand for patient transfer service. The city controls the provision of that service, but we have no control over demand. So as demand has gone up, money has not increased to sustain that. And the city's just, allocating resources at the council level to try to fill those holes. Hospital did offer funding, but it wasn't enough based on breaking even for the city. So that's how we are where we are now. And to be fair, I have not heard back yet from CEO Faust yet or from the CFO, but that's where we think we are, and that's what they seem to intimate would be the
I'd love
best
to
way to
get more
go.
involved in that, because I think
Yeah.
that partnership that's been in place for many years is a unique one that is, again, not duplicating services, and and there's a benefit to all if there's a way to continue it. So.
I think Chief Johnson, myself, and my CFO 100% agreed. And that's why we jointly commissioned the outside entity to come in and evaluate it. But if the hospital doesn't agree with that analysis, I can't convince them. What I will say, though, in terms of duplication, the intention right now is not to duplicate. The city, once that service becomes in-house at the hospital, the city will divest of those resources and staff. So we don't want to duplicate either. That'd be bad. You good? Okay.
Anyone else? Vice Mayor, please.
I had some ongoing concerns about the frequency at which we had 2 ambulances out doing transfers, and my concern was that if there was some sort of mass casualty in our community, we would not be able to respond. And the demand was it 51% of the time there were 2 ambulances?
Probably, let's say 4 years ago, before we layered this.
I'd say it's about 4 years ago, and before we layered in some additional help, we were running concurrent calls, including the numbers I remember from both E911, fire, transfer. It was about 70% of the time, and we've reduced that with the extra investments we've made. So yeah, it was my biggest concern was we were running structure fires in town with less than the required amount of people. We were actually responding to structure fires with like 5 people, 3 people, and because we were so busy and with others. So we needed to invest in that. So.
Yeah. And that became my concern as well, as a health professional.
Totally understandable, and I still would like to see if that service continue if possible. I know the hospitals agreed that they're going to open additional units, so there's less transfers down the road, and I know they're willing to continue conversation. So, it's not to hold up this meeting tonight over this, but it's an interesting issue that there's more than one side to the situation.
Sorry. I think our city manager and the folks, I'm going to volunteer them, the folks that have been working on this project for a couple of years now, would probably be more than happy to sit down with you and explain and catch you up on some of the details.
Yeah, wonderful. I'd love that, Jane. And
Yeah.
just full disclosure, I'm chairman of the hospital board, so I understand this situation very, very well.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
then you don't need to be caught up.
Anybody else like to add anything here? All right. All right, back to you then, city manager. And we
Thank you. The clerk is reloading the file. There was a slide that was missed. And it was not her fault. It was my fault. I wanted to touch on financial outlook a bit. While she's loading that, I'll let you know that we did share some information in the hard copy packet regarding the city's revenue and financial condition and outlook. In general, I think our condition and our outlook are quite good, and they're better than they've been in many, many years. When we've looked at sales tax revenue recently, in the last 3 to 4 fiscal years, we are experiencing some one-time sales tax related to wind energy development. And that is a pretty unique thing in Albany County that we have rarely experienced. Any residual tax revenue related to energy development. So we don't have coal, but we apparently have enough wind to harvest. And so we have significant one-time revenue. We are typically, as a community, in the bottom 4 or 5 cities of all 99 cities in terms of per capita revenue collection. And so that certainly makes Laramie have to be fairly scrappy. If we get the slide up, we can show you what a little bit of one-time wind energy money can do for you, taking us from in the bottom 5 of 99 cities and towns in Wyoming to roughly the middle. Pretty shocking, but it's one-time revenue. So Jennifer Wade, our finance director, is here, and she did the kind task of removing the one-time money to see where we would fall. And we still are in the bottom 5, but kind of at the top of the bottom 5, so that's good. I will say we've worked very hard in recent years, and the council's been very supportive of retail development and recruitment. We do believe that we will see some gains and maybe be moving out of the bottom 10% of all Wyoming cities in per capita sales tax revenue in future years. Nancy, if you can't get it, it's okay. We can go back to the other presentation. Right. That's okay. There are hard copies in front of you, and this is exactly why. So if you have any questions about revenue, I'm happy to answer them. I will tell you the priorities of City Council for how we're using the one-time money that we are seeing from wind energy development have been focused in supporting our public safety activities, also infrastructure, and for instance, the City Council right now are working on the establishment of the stormwater utility, which was a goal over the last 3 and 4 fiscal years, and are really committing startup funds to that stormwater utility system in the amount of $5 million to ease the burden on the ratepayers as we start up a stormwater program. That's okay. It's okay. It happens. Yeah.
Great.
Yes.
Does the one-time increase in sales and use tax through the turbine acquisitions dramatically affect the hardship allocation? Because obviously that's based on our sales and use tax And if we're increasing it, I would expect the hardship to go down to some degree. So how is that looking?
Yeah, that's actually a great question, Senator Rothfuss, and I might ask Jen to back me up on this, but I think my very general answer is yes, it is eroding what little bit of hardship the city receives. And I say that because I've told you guys for years that the Madden formula and the subsequent minor revision to that, while it includes hardship funding for low revenue cities, towns, and counties, in spirit, hardship funding is there, but it's not a very robust tool for us anymore. In fact, our overall direct distribution has declined every year now, Jen, I think for 6 years. I can't see her because she's right behind you, Gary, but our overall direct distribution has declined steadily for 5 or 6 years now, and the hardship element of it is almost non-existent. Is that a fair statement?
It is a generally fair statement. I would note that the legislature appropriated significant additional funds for the direct distribution, and so we're going to not consider those in this conversation, and Janine is absolutely correct.
So just go ahead. Yep.
All right. It may be too early to answer this question, but do we know how the rare earth play in northern Albany County may impact revenue streams?
I will tell you, if I, for one, do not. If someone else in this room is up to speed on that issue, I invite you to jump on in. Yeah, I don't either. I don't even know that I understand the taxation environment around that, Representative Sherwood. So I can't give you a good answer, but something maybe Jen and I can note, we can take a look at. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I'm a little out of my element. We don't have much of that historically. Okay, looks like we're back. Thank you, Nancy, for working on that. So here are the numbers I was talking about. You can see in fiscal 23, the median that year for per capita income was, I think, $352, if I remember correctly. Albany County, I should say, sat at 251, and we were, fourth of these 23 counties. When you look at it I always refer to it on a city and town basis. And so you recall I said we're in the bottom 5 typically among the 99 cities and towns as well. When we look at where we're at in that middle column with and this is just the first 4 pennies, the state sales tax, with that one-time revenue, I mean, look at that. Wow, we're like in the middle of the pack for the first time ever. But then if you look on the right-hand side of the screen, when we dropped out the one-time revenue, there we are back in the bottom portion of revenue capture counties. Okay, so let me get back to where we were. So we did have some legislative bills that we've been tracking. I think you all know we've been really paying attention to the Regulatory Reduction Committee's work over the last 18 to 24 months, I guess. There are many, 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 many bills, and those of you that are going to be in office in January, I don't envy you. There's a million bills, it seems like, and then this time of year, they just like proliferate like crazy and into the start of the session. We're doing everything we can, working with our sister cities and WAM to try and stay abreast of what is being proposed and how it would affect city government. And if we can provide information to you prior to session or during session, you know, we're always willing to do that. We have a few highlights we wanted to focus on. This material is in your packet as well if you'd like to read the detail. And I'm going to introduce Brandon Moen, who is a management analyst with the city of Laramie, and he's going to walk us through this piece of paper.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, in your packet, you should have this sheet. And for those that don't, you should have it in your emails. Probably harder to see without the monster cheat sheet, but, so we've got 10 bills that we've been monitoring, 4 from the Regulatory Reduction Task Force and 6 from Joint Revenue. In that first column, you'll find those bill numbers. It'll start with 25 LSO 0207, which is titled Residential Building Permit Timeline Requirements. This bill would establish building permitting timelines, so it would impose timelines for permitting, for building permits specifically. And
Forgot what that note.
Maybe angle your microphone down. Hey, Brent, maybe just like angle it like that.
Maybe he's got it down nice.
Yeah.
thank you. Sorry about that. Is the wind gone?
Yeah.
All right. I know it's Wyoming, but geez.
I can't think of it.
All right. Anyways, as I was saying, so it would establish building permitting timelines, and it would impose a punishment, which would be a 10% reduction or refund in the fees for that permit if it's failed to meet that timeline. At this time, no action was taken on this or any of the 4 bills in the last regulatory reduction meeting, as they did not have a quorum. Their next meeting will be December 4th. Our stance on this is we have a track record of meeting timelines, and we think that local government specifically can handle this well on their own. And then for those who have the digital file, you'll also have the links to the bills in that last column, as well as the last 2 bills will have estimates that LSO has provided. The next bill is 25 LSO 0337. That is site plan subdivision and zoning timeline requirements. The title is pretty self-explanatory. It would require schedules for all of those different planning aspects. And it would establish, it has a specific time limit that's blank right now, but it would have that as they develop that bill. We do not support this bill, and as stated with the last regulatory reduction bill, there was no quorum. 25 LSO 0134, property development exactions. This would place limits on exactions or mitigation fees for property development by local government entities. We do not support this bill, and it is, once again, no quorum. 25 LSO 0345, this would limit moratoriums on construction and land development by local governments. This is also a do not support bill. 25 LSO 0166, and these are beginning the joint revenue bills. Sorry. This would establish a tax exemption. So previously there was a bill that had a 4% tax exemption. Anything over 4% was exempt, increase year over year. This bill would lower that to 3% or the value of inflation. And it would also roll back to 2019, and it would begin January 1, 2026 for that tax year. We are monitoring that bill. As you can see in that stands column, we have a drawn out answer. That's a rude way to say that. We have a more detailed answer, and it has implications affecting fair market values. It has been flat. Besides these last few collection periods, we've all seen that costs have been pretty irregular. Next up, we have 25 LSO. Sorry, let me make sure I'm not going to read the wrong bill here. 25 LSO 0169, which is property tax refund program revisions. This one would simply change an item that was line vetoed in a bill sent in last year. They had a line that would have moved the refund from 165% or from 145 to 165. They changed it to be 145 to be consistent with the bill last year. We are simply monitoring that bill. 25 LSO 170, long-term homeowners tax exemption revisions. This would repeal a certain line in that bill that would qualify someone whose significant other has passed who qualified for that exemption. They would no longer be grandfathered in. An amendment was made repealing the sunset on that initial bill. The amendment bill language, it established 8 months to 6 months, so it reduced the residency for a year. We are monitoring. That bill did pass, and I should mention that the first bill in revenue failed. The second bill passed unanimously, and the bill I'm discussing right now passed 9-5. Next is property tax mill levy adjustment, 25 LSO 0167. This would limit mill levies in local governments across the state to that annual state revenue, and with an increase of only 3% or rate of inflation. This bill is laid back currently. It will be discussed at the next revenue meeting, and we are monitoring that bill. 25 LSO 0171, homeowner property tax exemption. This would exempt 25% of the first 2 million of a single-family residential structure. These would be required to be reported. There would be up to 100 million in backfill. And if there's insufficient funds, those will be distributed pro rata. And they did amend it to include land associated with that residential structure. That was passed 11-3, and we are monitoring that bill. And then finally, and I'm sorry for that giant wall of text, there was a lot in this bill. 25 LSO 0173, this is tax reform 2025, and this would have broad sweeping changes to sales and property tax across the state. And so we do not support that bill simply on that basis, and I may defer to the city manager to maybe speak more on that.
Just to clarify on the last one you just talked about, Brandon, that's laid back, but it's coming forward again, right?
Sorry, I should mention that. Yeah, it is laid back currently, but it will be at the next revenue meeting.
Right. So I'll just wrap up what Brandon said. So these are just some key bills that have been hot topics in committee the last 3 or 4 months. We know there are probably hundreds, maybe a couple hundred other bills. But I wanted to touch on a couple of these. With respect to the work that the Regulatory Reform Committee's been doing, I think from the city standpoint, the reason that we've noted on 3 of those 4 bills that we don't support it is that largely those bills will erode decisions that the city council have already made, meaning the city council's code revision is more, I got to think how I want to say this. This will cause us to take a step back. The decisions of the city council are more liberal. The requirement that would be imposed statewide would take back progress that the city council have made on certain of our code revisions. So that's part of the reason for not supporting it. With respect to the timelines for building and development permit review, you'll note in the cover there that we're monitoring this and we think we can live with it. But I also point out here, if you to legislate timelines from the Capitol building in Cheyenne is always, I think, a really slippery slope. And I use Laramie as an example, and we've shared this data with WHAM as well. In our community of 4,000 people, we have 3 planners and 1 community development director. We have reviewed just in the last 5 years, reviewed applications for 1 million square feet of building and renovation activity just on the University of Wyoming campus, not including the entire rest of the community. If you had asked us 7 years ago if we would be reviewing and having to oversee the construction of 1 million square feet of space, we would say, gosh, that seems pretty out there, right? But every community experiences different things. It could be intense industry or industrial development. For us, it's the campus and the growth and the renovation that is occurring up there. So to mandate a timeline from the Capitol that wouldn't take into account those extreme circumstances seems limited, I guess I would say. And in order for the city to accomplish that, you know, we actually had to commission outside professional help to the tune of almost $200,000 to not impede the University of Wyoming's timeline. And so if these timelines are imposed, I think it could be very costly to cities, and it could in fact become impossible for cities to do an effective job of making sure the buildings are built according to the codes that make them safe and make them habitable and make them continue standing for the full life of that facility. Community Development Director, you want to add anything?
No, I don't think so. I think just the rapid growth we've seen on the University of Wyoming campus in 12 years has added just an extra piece to the puzzle of providing good service to the community in terms of everybody else that wants to build a deck or a shed or a house or a commercial building in this community. And so it's finding that balance makes bills like this difficult for us to manage. It more administrative burden, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then lastly, I just wanted to add, with respect to the Tax Reform 2025 bill, you know, I'm a Wyoming native, and I know we've been talking about reforming our taxation policy in the state pretty much my entire lifetime. Right? What was shocking, I think, to the city when I saw this, to the finance director, and frankly to our WHAM partners, was this is super comprehensive tax reform in legislation. it would not only change sales tax structures, but it would change property tax structures. And there's no real good way to know the outcomes of that. And so what I think WHAM is going to advocate for is sensible in that, if the state wants to, again, take up tax reform like we did with Tax Reform 2000, which was a fantastic report and probably still very relevant in many ways, we would love to see interim work where we really understand comprehensively how that change in taxation policy comprehensively will affect for the city services locally to our residents. I recognize here and I noted here that the property tax forgiveness could be really compelling in a community like Laramie, where we have 5 of 7 census tracts designated as areas of persistent poverty, right? So I think we all understand that for residents, there could be important tax relief there. But if this tax reform then means that the 6-penny capital facilities tax fails to be supported and the city then has to raise water and sewer rates, then it becomes a trade-off, right? Maybe lower income residents have less property tax, but the city council is almost certainly going to be faced with increasing water rates because we won't be able to subsidize the activities in water and sewer with the capital facility sales tax. So we're very concerned that increasing sales tax by 2% would mean there would no longer be support for local sales tax, and that could really force some hard decisions, certainly at the state level, but for city councils as well. So that's the reason that we've said, this is a big concern, and I think that you'll probably hear that same sentiment from WHAM when they come forward. Last thing I'll add on that, Bill, is when I listened to the testimony, and Jen Wade, our finance director, did as well, there was not a single positive comment in committee. Not only it wasn't just WHAM there whining, right? It was industry, it was the energy industry, it was everybody. And I think what you heard in that committee hearing was exactly what I've said. The fear of do we on the fly, from the floor of the legislature, try to make comprehensive tax policy changes for the state, or do we take a more thoughtful, slow, measured approach? So everybody's worried about what it could mean. So anyway, that is what we have. Councilors.
Thank you. Councilor Newman had a question.
City manager actually answered my question, but can I do a comment?
Yeah.
So the ones that we do not support for future councils and these meetings, can we put an asterisk next to those and say like why? Like it goes against our goals or something? Because we did that in the bottom, but then it's like, these we don't support and nobody knows why.
Right.
So if we could do something like that.
Absolutely. To that point, absolutely. And I think the reason that we didn't on the 3 regulatory reform bills is they've kind of been going through this process for about 15 months, and they kind of keep coming back in little tweaked forms. And so I had it in previous material, but good point, and we should have had it here. Thank you.
Thanks, City Manager. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? Any of you folks? Yeah, please. Yeah.
Just a quick question. I think we're all concerned about what would happen with property tax reduction and how that affects the cities and the schools and that type of thing. Do you have a framework that you would suggest if that starts to come through that it should look like, just without specific, but just kind of a general framework, what property tax reform would look like? Because there's certainly the citizens are saying property tax reform, right? And so do you have a suggestion that you might throw out there?
Well, I'll defer to the council on that. I will say, I know there is, this is a hot topic, and how many bills passed last session, you guys? Like 7 property tax bill reform provisions. Honestly, I'll be honest, there's so many of them, I can't keep track of them. There's been so many ideas, and so many have passed. I understood Constitutional Amendment A, if it was approved by the voters, may bring into question the constitutionality of bills that were passed last session. You guys probably know more about this than I do, those of you that are continuing on. From the city standpoint, I think the city, just revenue-wise, we want it to be revenue neutral. And you'll see in the notes here, I don't know from a policy standpoint what the council would say about property tax forgiveness. I think we all recognize it's gone up, but the state has not a very good track record. I'm going to try to say this politically correctly, of promising to backfill revenues to local governments and honoring that promise across legislative sessions, right? So I don't mean to imply the state, doesn't honor its promises. It's just that you get a change in legislative personalities and priorities every couple of years. And so one legislature promised to backfill the food tax and then kind of didn't really honor that promise, which I think we all from Laramie understand how devastating to revenue that was for local government. So we just want to be kept whole. And I'd ask Jen if she wants to add anything about the money side of this policy question.
No, city manager, you did a great job.
All right, Ken.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, and I think just to maybe finer point that, the sort of targeted reliefs that have come into play are I think largely bearable, right? That sort of thing seems workable, but it really is just, to the point city manager made earlier, if our revenue goes down, our fees likely go up to offset, right? So it ends up sort of being a wash anyway, right? It's going to cost the same amount of money to pave a street or do something of this sort. So keeping us whole, I think, is really important. And then, Gary, I would just add that during the session, if there is a bill and you want us to tell you what that means for the city of Laramie, our staff is at your disposal to understand sort of the specifics. The other legislators can speak to that. We've sure done it in the past. And if you have any questions about that sort of thing, I suppose I'm offering it up and I won't be in this seat, but somebody else will, and I'm sure they'll support that too. So, but our staff will provide you whatever you need as far as local examples of this sort of otherwise and maybe existential conversation that's happening around property tax.
Local input's really, really important, so thank you.
It sure is, yeah, absolutely. Other questions, folks? Okay.
Wait, are there any bills you're super excited about?
That's a good question. I can't, sorry, I can't think of any off the top of my head. Yeah.
And excuse me for being late tonight. I'm sorry. I was working and driving. One bill that I think might come up that we saw last year, I believe Representative Heiner brought the bill, but it was solar, allowing for people to have more rooftop solar. And I believe that there's intention to bring that bill back, and he's slated to be potentially chairman of minerals. So I think it might have more ability to get through the legislature, which is something that folks have been wanting for a long time. I think would help impact cities and towns, as well as our school districts and other government buildings, as well as just the people of our districts.
Thank you for that, Representative Provenza. And the city would sure support that. There's solar panels on the building just over the way that, had there not been the cap, could have gone a lot further to offsetting the cost of these buildings. But now, when you look at it, it's a big unit, but it looks small because the building is gigantic. But it could be significant. Instead, we are limited to fairly small offsets. So, yeah, that would be meaningful for the city, let alone obviously the residents.
And include the rent or space.
Yeah, and we do have, as you all know, we have considerable agricultural property as well, oddly as a city, but we sure do, that could be used in this way as well.
Absolutely. And the ranch has the potential, Todd will keep me true to the numbers, but the solar ability at the ranch that we've been investigating is, large scale to the tune that I think it could offset all of the city use. I don't remember all the right gigawatt, whatever numbers, but Todd does.
As city manager, the estimate on the solar project that we have a lease option on is 180 megawatt generating facility with 80 megawatts battery storage. It's actually beginning to move through the industrial siting process, doing their cultural studies, their environmental studies, and getting ready to hopefully be a power purchase item at a certain point. One of the things about Southeast Wyoming is we're starting to become a little bit tighter on generation and consumption. So it could really add some oomph to Albany County and what we can do through those pieces. But when we first started that project, as city manager had said, I think the daily average use for the city of Laramie was 170 megawatts. And so provided could be a nice boost.
Yeah, it's a big dream, but it could be amazing if it happens. So thank you for sharing that, because that might be very meaningful.
Yeah, and I think too, one thing we have to remember is when we have industry looking to invest and do that, they have a really hard time getting power out of here because of the infrastructure is not as good as it needs to be. So, and maybe that's not Wyoming's fault, but maybe there is conversations at the state level that could help shore up some of the lines to get it to move to other communities.
Great.
Mayor, to the question of
Please.
whether there's any legislation we're excited about, I might just ask my department heads or give you the option, if you are aware of anything working through your associations, through WASCOP or the fire chiefs, that is something that you wanted to talk about just briefly, we'd love to hear about that. I know it's still pretty early before session, but.
City manager, I know the Wyoming fire chiefs are following the single stair legislation that might be proposed. So that's the one item we're following.
As I understand, it's an opposition to the bill, not in support.
Yeah, it'll be.
We were looking for something we could be.
Yeah, I don't have anything I'm looking forward to going over there for.
So preemptive. So
Question today, who's excited about politics?
I'll be candid. I'm not excited about the legislative session. I don't look forward to what is going to come out of this legislature. And I'm being honest with you because I think we need to be prepared. This is a legislature that I think we can look at the bills that they bring year after year and what has failed. And many of those bills will pass and people will hurt. And what we will need is help articulating the harm that they are doing to our city. Because if we don't articulate the harm as it's happening, because it might take a while for people to feel it, but we're going to need all hands on deck and telling folks like, this is what's happening and why, so that our electorate can send better people. So I hate to be doom and gloom, and the counterpart to my good cop, I'm bad cop, if you didn't guess. But I would just ask on anybody in our communities to just kind of have those conversations about why.
Thank you, Carly. And we're, I'll offer the same thing, but maybe a bit different framing. We all know you don't have staffs, but our staff is here to help as best we can for anything that's sort of pertinent to us. And just ask, and we're there for you. Councilor Newman?
I'm glad you started this conversation, so my question doesn't seem as bad. Which makes me, feel better. We gave you guys a list of what we're scared of. What exactly are you scared of?
I'll start since I'm a dark cloud. I'm afraid of a 50% property tax cut. I think that has a potential major impact to you all. I'm afraid even if we backfill that like fiscally, I don't know how, I know our LISRA is massive. Well, it'll give us some time, but it's not a sustainable model. There's a ton of social issues that I think are going to come down the pike that are going to impact the people of our communities. Trying to think, I'm sure I can come up with a list of like 25 things that why I can't sleep at night and why I'm worried about the upcoming session. So I'll just keep throwing them out throughout the meeting, but off the top of my head, that's the big one. Yeah, I'd be curious what my other colleagues have to say. Oh, education. I'm worried about education. So I serve on the education committee. With that property tax cut, we're going to see cuts to education. I think that we're going to see cuts to education anyway. The courts are probably going to come back and tell us that we have to fix that. Hopefully we still have a good Supreme Court in place when that happens, because there's just going to continue to be litigation. Some of the wind stuff or just some of the renewables is problematic as well. And the continuance of mandating that we stay stuck on fossil fuels, just given, I don't know if people remember the month of October here, but it was 70 degrees every day.
So I'll add in my chipper voice. I am concerned, and Gary, you and I should probably talk about this too, cuts to the Department of Health that has been shared with me from some of the leadership that's coming in. And so understanding what that means for our community, I think it'll probably take a few partners getting in the room and understanding what does that mean for city services or county services or the nonprofits that offer services. So again, that we really are understanding, you know, when this theoretical, like, oh, let's just cut the Department of Health by 30%, like what that actually means to services on the ground. So I there you go.
I've come to rely on you for optimism, Trey. But that's okay. Anyone else? E3? Okay.
I'll just note a couple of things. And, you know, there is an overall rhetoric of cuts and cut to services and cut to obviously all taxes and everything that we've been discussing. But one of the things that I think is going to be a challenge for us looking over the next few years is really over the last decade plus, the legislature has built a pretty robust system because of our cyclical nature and revenue. And so we have a little shy of $2 billion in the LISRA. We've got robust reserve accounts backing all of our endowments that provide us with spending capacity. And that was very thoughtful. That policy was exceptional that we had the capacity to do that. What it does is insulate the state from the direct effects, the near-term effects of decreases in revenue. But then we rapidly start burning through that. So what can happen is even if we decrease our revenue, which seems likely, we'll still have the money available to pay all the bills for a while if we choose to. We may not choose to. The direct distribution is a great example, right? How do we get $120 million direct distribution through this next legislature? I have no answer to that. It's going to be a challenge. But what happens then is that we'll be speeding towards a cliff and we'll have a pretty good runway. Nobody will feel it until we go off that cliff. And then we will have basically burned through 20 years of thoughtful legislative planning and putting away funds and building a budgetary structure that can sustain the volatility of our economy. And right now, obviously, everything's great for the state in terms of revenue. It still looks good, maybe down a little bit, but it still looks pretty good. But that doesn't mean 2 years from now it will look good. So that's the fear that keeps me awake to a large degree, is how much damage we can do very quickly that won't be felt for a couple of years. And the damage is literally all the promises that were made on the campaign trail by a lot of the folks that are now going into the legislature. So it'll be a real challenge and struggle to head that off. So while we may not see direct effects this year or even the following year, there won't be any money a couple of years later. So it won't be that, well, we're choosing not to fund the direct distribution. It'll be that there is no money for the direct distribution. And as Carly pointed out, you know, that's on the general fund side. And then when you look at the school foundation program side, we'll have similar concerns where there were desires thrown out to, you know, cut those budgets by 30% and pretty draconian. But all of that is clearly tied heavily to what we do with our property taxes. And if we do end up significantly cutting property tax, that directly means significantly cutting K-12 education. There's no, you can't have both. It's impossible to keep the budget for K-12 and cut property taxes. Those are not two things that happen at the same time. And then there's plenty of other things that I'd be concerned about, but those are the ones that weren't mentioned that I spend a lot of time thinking about.
Please, Ken. Yeah.
I hope I don't have the wind here, and we'll see. This is the windy mic. I'm not as optimistic as Chris is, and I'm usually the optimist of the bunch, but I'm not as optimistic because I think the will is there to cut taxes for sure, and that's going to happen. but there's also, I think, a will to cut expenses. They're not going to backfill. I'm afraid that we're going to have the worst of both worlds. We're going to start cutting revenue, and make up for that, they're going to cut expenses and not backfill. And we're going to have to start cutting services. And I think that's what's going to happen. And I'm very concerned about that. I'm personally 100% behind backfills and preventing the tax cuts, or at least targeting them to the people that need the tax cuts and minimizing their impact. But I really fear that anything that smacks of a overspending is a word we hear a lot, and that's going to be driving a lot of the decisions, and I'm worried about that. I really am.
One more thing that came to mind is, I've heard some of incoming leadership say they want to cut $100 million from the university. What that ends up looking like is lost staff, lost people from our community. People will have to leave or find other employment if there's something there. So I think that's also a concern, is just while university maybe doesn't give the city much money on hand, just the people that are there that have incomes that are able to pay property taxes to fund our services, our essential services, are not necessarily going to be there. And what does that then do potentially to other markets here in town? And other businesses. So I think, I don't remember what year it was. I was still in grad school here, and we lost 86 faculty members in 1 year. And that was a fraction of the cuts that we might be facing this year. So I think looking for ways to soften some of those blows if we can, where we can, some sort of plans. I'm not sure what those are. And conversely, in committees, I have continued to bring up, we do not allow cities and counties to raise revenue appropriately in the way that they want. There should be more local control in how we're raising those revenues. I'm not sure how far those conversations are going, but my hope is that the more people that are saying it, particularly people that have D's behind their names, maybe we can start seeing some way out of potentially the darkness we're driving into.
Thanks, Craig. Sherry?
So being the new kid on the block, I'm very much where Chris is. I think on a lot of this, this long-term funding scares me to death. You look at the state, because we're a cyclical state. We have been and we will be a cyclical state. And so it scares me to death that we're going to have cuts. I mean, the bottom line, the people in the state, maybe not Laramie, but the people in the state want cuts, and the legislature, certainly the people I've talked to, we're going to have cuts. And so our job is to make sure they're thoughtful cuts, that they're planned, to understand the damages. That's where we're going to need to work together as a community. We're all in this together. And when legislation comes up, not be afraid to jump in the car and go to Cheyenne. Being in Cheyenne is so much better than being on Zoom. Go to Cheyenne, because you can have the hallway talk in Cheyenne that you don't on Zoom. So get to Cheyenne. Let's work together on thoughtful cuts are coming. It's not if they're coming, but how can we make them as thoughtful as we possibly can be to preserve what we need to preserve? The University of Wyoming, our city, the services that we provide as a city and the county, that we work together on this. It's very, very important as we move forward. And then at the same time, when I say we, you point a finger, you got three coming back at you. I got three coming back at me, maybe more. We've got to recognize we've done a really poor job of telling the people in our communities how we're spending our money. We have means, we may throw them up and say, yeah, it's all public information. But people need to hear how we're spending the money. That's where the reason we are where we are, is we've done a poor job. And when I say we, it's me too, of telling everybody how we're spending our money. So we can't change the past, but we can change today and we can change the future. So we've got to go above and beyond saying, this is where your tax dollars are going, and this is how it has benefited you and how it will benefit you by doing it. I think that I can't stress that enough, that we share the story. As Carly said, you know, it's coming. We need to then tell what's happened, why it's happened, what was doing, and then if we reinstall it, what the good will come out of it. Because we all in this together are why it's happening today. We didn't do a good enough job sharing our story. We can point fingers, we can do whatever, but it's all of us collectively didn't do a good enough job. So we are in the situation we are. We got to control the situation, working together. But let's share the story going out and tell why it is important. And don't be afraid to drive to Cheyenne. Don't be afraid to call. I know any of us will take phone calls. Call us. It's going to be a rocky road for the next couple of years. But I think if we work together, we can dampen it. And like I say, I'm where Chris is on this. We just can't reach into the big pool of money and spend it all today, because then we're going to fall off a big, big cliff. So we've got to figure out how to work through it.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. One thing we sort of glazed over quickly, there was a clip of it in one of the slides, but to your point, one of the things we've been working on at the city through this new enterprise software is basically, you can see it down here on the bottom right, that Laramie Open Finance portal will be a really powerful tool for the public and you all as well, to see really, it makes it really easy for you to navigate sort of every expense of the city in a pretty meaningful way. It's not exactly the point you're making, but I bring it up to share that I think you're right. I mean, I think there is some need to sort of, I guess it's not popular to add a marketing expense to your municipal budget though, right? So, but that's who tells the story, right? And so it's a bit complicated from where I'm sitting, but I think you're not wrong either. So, and these folks will sure be engaged through the session, paying attention to what you guys are up to, and there to support you if you need it.
Mayor, briefly, one thing to tack on about the backfill concept, which we all want to backfill, but just to be clear, there's no money, there's no revenue to offset the backfill. So all backfill will come from savings. So it is what we were talking about, just burning what we've built up as that rainy day savings. So it seems like, okay, well, we've offset this and there's a backfill. No, we're just eating away at the sound economic policy of prior years and spending it right now through a backfill if there is a tax cut. And that's going to be hard for everyone to understand, but that is the reality. Therefore, it will be a finite runway of backfill, and then that will further exacerbate the effects of it. It comes back to, why did we stop paying the bills for the grocery tax? Where's the revenue to pay that bill with? There wasn't one. And therefore, you pay it for a couple of years, and then you look at the budget and you say, all right, there's no revenue to offset that, so we can't afford it. That is absolutely what will happen again with any cuts in property tax, realistically, beyond what we did. We did some small, modest ones that we actually probably could afford based on the increased assessed valuation. But any of what's being talked about right now is going to not be offset by any other revenue. It's going to be a direct expenditure. And with that, Mayor, I'm afraid I have to run. I have to go watch my son's symphony concert, which starts in 13 minutes.
Get after it.
So we'll see if I make it.
Great. Thank you for being here, Chris. We appreciate it. Councilor Newman, did you have something to add? And then we'll come over here.
The reason why I asked this question is because a lot of this stuff does trickle down to us. So putting this on our radar will help make some of our decisions that we have to make in the coming years. And then if I representative from, wait for him to come back to this, okay? Yeah. So if you want to go to Provenza and come back, or
so this is in the spirit of continuing to educate our constituents. So anybody who's listening, the rainy day account, or essentially our savings, generates 30% of our general fund revenue. So that's interest earned. That's really powerful. And so I know a lot of times we hear quips of like, it's raining, why aren't we digging into our rainy day account? And I remember saying that before I got elected, until I really understood that large rainy day account means that we're generating 30% of our general fund. That means we're not having to raise taxes. But the more we pull out of the rainy day fund to backfill or to send out bear checks, that 30% goes down. So then our general fund takes a hit as well. So just for context.
Thank you, Trey. Go ahead, Carly, please.
Thank city manager for, I mean, that institutional knowledge is something that the legislature is going to be lacking. I mean, I think since we've come in, I mean, it's wild to me that we're kind of the old guard now, having only served 4 years, but that institutional knowledge that lives within the legislature is gone. And so folks like you who have been in these positions for a while can help tell that story. So when we say like helping tell our communities what the impact is of the legislature, it's something like the sales tax was not, or the grocery tax wasn't refilled. Things like that to help us demonstrate like, hey, you know, we're a fiscally conservative state and we're a fiscally responsible state, and historically we've done that, but now we're failing to meet that metric. So with the legislature not having it, I'll be needing people like you all who have spent some time in your positions to help kind of fill in that knowledge.
Thanks, Carly. Councilor Newman.
One thing that I would say, and it kind of goes back to what you were saying, Rep. Crum, is we can call you guys, but you guys can call us too. If you guys, and I know the mayor has already said this, but I wanted to just reiterate it because Trey and Carly, sorry, Rep. Sherwood, yeah, we've had great conversations, and they have a different letter behind their name than I normally would, right? So, and I appreciate that. So, make sure that, and like some of the other reps who I've never talked to because they won't answer phone calls, irritate me, and they make decisions that affect us and never reach out to us. So, I appreciate you guys for that.
You can, I can't speak for anybody else. You can call me anytime. It may depend on when it is, how long it takes to get back, but I will get back. And sometimes we're going to really agree and sometimes we not, but we'll have a good conversation and it'll be respectful.
That's all you can ask, right? We appreciate it. Yeah. All right. Any other questions?
Mayor.
Oh, yes.
And I know the question was asked if there was some legislation that we're supportive of. So I'm going to try to bring you guys back. But the abandoned and nuisance building legislation that's coming through, that's kind of spearheaded by Representative Sherwood, could really lend to some benefits in our community, especially the prime corner downtown that we've all seen. So I just wanted to give you guys something to smile about before we change subjects.
One. Todd, we rely on you for that too. We got there. All right. Anything else?
Yeah, not to pick on the chief, but was there any WASCOP issues that
Chief Brown.
hopefully are positive?
We have a couple that we're following.
I thought you did. Okay.
Some trespassing stuff, nothing significant. I think Todd did a great job of carrying the football into the end zone, so I'll let it die at that.
There you go.
Great. All right.
Fair enough.
I just wanted to make one point before we move out of bills, because when Representative Provenza just mentioned cuts to university, you know, I think everyone who's lived here for any significant amount of time will likely agree with this point, but if you disagree, I am happy to hear that as well. But my observed experience, both professionally and personally, living here for a long time, is that when you look at our local economy, right, look at like our top 6 employers, the University of Wyoming by far is our largest employer, 300 plus employees. And then it is the school district, if I remember, this may not be in the right order, school district, city, county, hospital, Tri-Hydro, and that's, I think, our top. Okay, so you look at that, 4 of those top 6 are governmental employees, and their future and their revenue is all going to be decided by the legislature. And One of them is, I would consider quasi-governmental. I don't know if you agree, Gary, but I think the hospital has some governmental, but some also private aspects to it. And then we've got like Tri-Hydro in our professional community of brain trust engineering firms and those firms, but they are small in comparison to those top 4 governmental employers. So what I've experienced when I've looked at city revenue for years is when the legislature goes into cut mode and cuts the university and cuts education and school district funding and cuts local government, city and county funding, there is this like synergistic and exponential spiral for Laramie and for Albany County. And that's an observation, and I could probably get you data on it, but what you just said just has me terrified. I'll just leave it at that for the future of the community. And we're going to talk about housing in a minute. And I'm like, well, maybe we don't need all those houses. I don't know, you know, so maybe it could. It's like that's sleeping.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it really worries me, you know, if you get layoffs across all your local government, your university and the school district, or reductions in size, it is exponential in this county, it seems. So anyway, I just put that out there. I guess what I would ask is, we're certainly willing to support you. I know the council and the incoming councilors are willing to provide information, and I would advocate lastly for, if the state wishes to cut funding, certainly we understand if that's priority. And like I said, I'm a native, I get it. I understand there are lots of different parts of Wyoming that have different priorities, but for city and local, well, specifically for city and town governments, Wyoming's taxation structure is exceedingly oppressive and allows no control to local elected officials when it comes to floating their own boat and letting a community make choices about the quality of life and the quality of services that they want to have. So I would remind everyone there's a lot of potential there for statutory revisions that might in fact allow local elected officials in this state to run their cities and towns and putting the revenue power with them and with the people that live here, so that the state isn't sort of this benefactor always that has to be gone through. And I don't know how you guys feel about that, but I think in general, local control is something the council's always supported.
Yeah, that's accurate for sure. I think any more tools we can have, I think we would love to make an attempt at using them.
Yeah, and on the regulatory reduction bills that we said we were not supporting, I should have mentioned it when you asked the question, Councilor Newman, but the reason for that is they're an erosion of local control, right? Instead of letting these folks who are elected locally decide what is a reasonable time for Derek's department to get a building permit reviewed and approved, it's trying to do it from a state level where, you know, the detail that is necessary to make a good decision may not be available. And so leaving it with the local electeds, and that's the reason. So just to clarify that.
Go ahead, Carly.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, you know, I'd probably having folks from Laramie isn't always the strongest lobbying body, but I will say that something the legislature respects are law enforcement, firefighters, in folks in those professions. So if any ability we can to have those sorts of faces show up, they just always carry more weight.
Thanks, Carly.
Thank you.
All right.
We're closing out with your questions and some answers to them. So we asked you ahead of time, do you have any questions for us? And these were kind of the group of questions we received. They were centered around people, I would say, around housing, which of course none of us are surprised to hear, and around economic development. So here's some information we can leave with you that you asked for. One of the first questions was, does the city have the manpower needed to meet the mission of the city? So in your packet, you have our entire annual workforce report, which we publish every year, and most recently was updated in August of 2024. This is an excerpt from that report. This is a 10-year history of the authorized positions in the city by sort of the type of work that they do. Enterprise employees are in our utility activities, so water, sewer, and stormwater. Our business accounts, general government is just that. And then you see fire and police comprising our public safety employees. As a rule, when you look into this data, and again, there's more detail in the packet, we have pretty much the same amount of employees today that we had 10 years ago. In 2017-18, there were legislative cuts in funding to cities, towns, and counties. We decreased staffing and really kept stable, our compensation. And it has now, this year, finally come to the point where the city has gained ground that was lost in 2017-18. For the first time in 6 years, we have a fully staffed management team, and we have departments that are largely fully staffed, similar to where they were 10 years ago. This is our customer service ratio. You can't see it under there, but we track this as part of reporting to the community annually. So we look at what is the growth in population and what change in city employees has there been. This statistic can be a little difficult to interpret, so I will talk to you a little bit about the history here, and it's all tied to population counts and census, right? Universities are designated difficult to count. I think that's the right terminology. University communities, excuse me, are designated by the U.S. Census as difficult to count communities. We believe that Laramie's been undercounted for many years. We work every 10 years with the census to try to help them to get a good count, and we work with student government and the university. But candidly, you can see fiscal 20 has a little asterisk by it. That's because fiscal 20 was a devastating year that will resonate in this community in terms of dollars and cents for 10 years. Because the university sent the students home mid-March to spring break with COVID-19 and the pandemic really becoming a reality across the globe. They 7 days later sent them an email and said, just stay home, don't come back to Laramie, because the whole world shut down, as we all recall. And consequently, when the census takers went out in April, the census count was abysmal. And it showed, in fact, a decline in population. All local data, all county data does not support the number the census locked us into. Our building starts, our utility services all tell us that we actually grew in population, but we're stuck, unfortunately, with the census count of 2020, even though we know it's very, very wrong. So you see the customer service ratio, they're dropping to what looks like, kind of a pretty not too bad number. One city employee serving in fiscal 20, 113 residents, but we know that number's wrong, right? But we have no way to have a more accurate number. So we do track this. It's mildly useful based on the veracity of that census count every 10 years. Did you have any questions on that? And then we'll talk a little bit about wages. Yeah.
I don't know what the role city can play in this, but is there, census is going to come back in 4 years. Are we thinking ahead and how we're ensuring that we have an accurate census count for 2030?
That's a really great question. And I'll tell you, it only happens every 10 years, but I've been now through 2 of these, right? Yeah. And assistant city manager and the previous one and the community and development department in our GIS section do. We create data for them. We give them addressing. In 2010, we made a huge push because one of the problems that they had, and we realized they had then, is they get addressing, but Laramie has lots of hidden addresses, right? You got a house and, you can go to the front door, but there's like 3 more doors in the back and 4 apartments in the basement. Mm-hmm. So our GIS folks, and using our own utility and addressing data, we provide them GIS files so they can better knock on all the doors and not just the front door. We got a good count in 2010, and I felt like we were closer. And I guess I look at Derek, because I know you and I worked on it back then. I think, Todd, you were involved. But 2020 was just devastating. Yeah.
Councilor Richardson.
Thanks. Have we ever partnered with the university to try to communicate the need for a count in Laramie and how university students should be counted? Because I know as a university student, or when I was in college, it wasn't even slightly top of mind to know where my count belonged.
Right. Me too, Councilor Richardson. I'm sure I got counted in Natrona County for a long time when I was in college era. Yes, we do. The short answer to that is yes, we do. Like I said, we've worked with ASUW because university students under the U.S. Census rules should be counted in this community. They should not be counted at home. And so we've worked with student government to spread the word, and also Old Main. And then I'll let the assistant city manager talk about group housing and something that UW did help us with that probably took a little bit of the edge off of the devastating numbers we got in 2020.
Absolutely. Thanks, City Manager. Over the last census, we worked very extensively with the University of Wyoming due to what was going on, but the group quarters counting is very difficult, and so they were able to actually supply to the census their housed group quarters without those students actually having to count. And so they were able to provide it in one document to the census to show the students that were housed by the University of Wyoming at their student housing. And so that was significant and helpful, but this, the challenges we faced, we worked extensively, as Janina said, with ASUW, and then Chris, I can't remember his last name. He lives in Cheyenne at the University of Wyoming. He was one of the vice presidents, and worked extensively to make sure there was plenty of advertising about how to count. And even they extended and sent emails to students that were not here, but this was still their residence, to try to get them to remember to count for Laramie when they do fill out the census. And so there was a lot of work. It just was unsuccessful, unfortunately. There was also a lot of hesitance in the last census to even answer the door and provide information. There was a big impetus and a big push about not providing information at that time too.
Without UW's help in 2020 on the group quarters, we'd have been 2,000 or 3,000 people lower than we were. And I'll just close that topic by mentioning that this is a pervasive issue across the nation for university communities. And they came together after 2020 and actually filed a letter with Congress and asked Congress to force a recount for town and gown communities. And it's unanswered to this day, but it was significant enough for so many towns that cities and towns across the nation that they actually authored a letter, but no action on it.
Vice Mayor, did you have something to add?
I was just going to say that the town and gown has spent the last 18 months working on significant restructuring to be more inclusive of higher education in Albany County, and also more representative of various entities. And the functionality is increased significantly, and that may be a body that we can begin working on it and develop a subgroup that begins to work on reaching that, because we have Wyotech, LCCC, the university, all represented in the Town and Gown Steering Committee now. So that could be a useful tool for us.
I agree. That's a great point. And we didn't even talk about Wyotech and where they were at in 2020. That's a whole other issue. Although your students are here short enough. I'm looking at Councilor Newman. I'm sorry. like you're the point person for Wyotech. But your students are probably not counted because they aren't here the 9 months or on April 1st. So
yeah, a good majority of them are only here for 9 months. So
yeah,
it would be kind of hard. It would be kind of hard to, get a good count. Right. I'm sure staff could. I'm going to not talk for them, but I'm sure they could run a report to help with that through Town and Gown.
Yeah.
If they can, I'll figure it out, do it myself.
All right.
Thank you,
They also get new students in every 9 months, so it's
no, actually,
a consistent number. Where you?
No, so Wyotech's kind of different than most places. We have a start every 3 months. So we get new students every 3 months, and we have a graduation that same time too. So we have a graduation, and then the next week is a new start. But we recently, since COVID and since Jim took over, and we have about 1,100 students on campus at any given time, whether they've been there for 3 months, 6 months, or a year. It kind of depends.
Thank you, Councilor. All right, City Manager.
Okay. Another question that you asked us was, is the city paying competitive wages compared to local markets? And that's a very timely question. City Council authorized a compensation study and also a reserve so that we could fund the outcomes of that compensation study. It was conducted in fall of 23. So about a year ago, we commissioned Bolton HR Consulting, their national firm, to do a market analysis. I just pasted in a little look-see here from what they told us, which was actually pretty devastating. We had kept salaries pretty stable stable. Going into 2020, I thought, yeah, we probably need to be looking at some adjustments. Then the pandemic happened. We went into spending freeze, sort of freak out conservative fiscal posturing mode because we had no idea how COVID would affect our revenues. And so we did not adjust salaries until just a couple years ago. And you can see our results came back and said that the city was not paying competitively, which we well knew, but we had objective data, and that allowed us to develop a target. And so we implemented the outcomes of the market analysis in January of this year, 2020, with an organizational target to bring our people to 50% or the median of the public sector market. And you can see our consultant did evaluate us against public sector employers, also against general or more private sector, and then also evaluated us against the peer labor market, which was a group of Wyoming and regionally similar communities, largely from Wyoming and Colorado, but also I think a couple other states. I can't remember, Jen, maybe South Dakota and Utah or Idaho. So we implemented the findings of that in January of 24. And so we are paying a competitive wage now compared to local markets. We made a significant adjustment of over $1 million, most of that going to wages and benefits. We also, as I said, have been able to return our staffing level finally this year to what it was 6 years ago in order to be sure that we had sufficient operational capacity. And that was about 43% of the investment against the 57% of the money invested to bring salaries to competitive market ranges. Any questions there? Our goal going forward is to not let these wages become stale. As you know, rates for labor have really grown quickly in recent years. And so we don't want to bring people to that 50% target, only to find that this year we aren't keeping those wages up to snuff. And we find ourselves in a couple of years back with most of our folks well below the 25th percentile.
Any questions before we move on? Great. All right.
Well, let's talk about all those houses we think we need. We hope we're going to need. In 2015, we did a housing study to project our housing need through 2030. So while it is a 2015 study, the data is relevant and was planned to take into account growth trajectories through 2030. Here's kind of a timeline of what we know through our data we have added. 719 new housing units since 2015, 611 being single family, and then we have 108 new multifamily units, we believe, on 9 different lots throughout the community. Looking at 2024, right now, we're bringing 81 more build-ready single-family lots online of small, medium, and large size, which is important in terms of affordability. And then by the summer, we believe we will have another 86 build-ready single-family lots ready for sale because developers will be completing infrastructure to those platted areas, and then an additional 4 multifamily lots ready to be sold and developed. We are also, and I'm not going to touch much on this because the next slide, Todd and Derek are going to talk to you in detail about our North 4th Street housing development, but the phase 1 of that we think will bring 66 more units online in roughly the next year and a half. And then we have right now approved by City Council and awaiting the developer to bring forward the final plat, 424 single-family lots and 4 multifamily lots. So when the developer pulls the trigger on that, gets it to these folks, and they vote yes, we think probably in the next couple of years we'll see another 400 and some come online. Here's the total numbers. So our study told us we needed 4,000 housing units by 2030, 2,600 more beyond the almost 1,400 that we have, that we know are in the queue right now through platting processes and other development, building permits, excuse me. So 2,600 more homes is what we think we'd like to bring online by 2030 or make ready from a city standpoint with lots ready to sell and such. I'll close this slide and then hand it over to these guys just by sharing with you. The city has done all kinds of things they're going to tell you about to try to deal with this issue, but despite having plats and lots and all of the pieces in place that the council are responsible for, we still continue to see building actually happening at a fairly consistent rate as it has historically, which is about 50 to 60 homes getting a permit requested for each year and actually constructed. And that's a private sector activity, right? Like the city doesn't go out and like build houses. So we do believe there's something in the private sector that is a sticking point. Whether the city has control over that or can influence that is a different question. But on the city side, it's been a pretty aggressive push to make sure we're doing our due diligence. And then closing out, this is to the last question here, which I think was from Representative Chestak, again, pointing out the problem of affordable housing and asking how the legislature and city can support these efforts. So I've listed out here, and Todd and Derek are going to talk to you a little bit about what the city's done in a little more detail. And then we offered a couple suggestions over here, and the council may want to augment suggestions for what the state could do. So Derek, you want to start?
Yeah, thanks. Just kind of quickly touching on the items that you kind of see on the screen. So first off, mobile home park standards. The city of Laramie does take a pretty active role in mobile home parks. Even mobile home parks that exist within the community, we do inspections every 2 years. That is fairly new. We've gone through 3 cycles now of 2-year inspections. However, those are for very basic life and safety issues. We are not going through and doing any types of reviews related to landscaping, making sure roadways are paved internally within the park or anything like that. This is making sure, that we don't have problems that would cause a safety issue, especially fires within mobile home parks. They can be extremely dangerous. And so we are doing that in a combination of both the planning department, our building department, our fire department, and our code enforcement department. And so we've seen measurable improvements within the quality and what we're seeing in the parks, but there's still a long ways to go within our mobile home parks related to that. We do allow for mobile home parks throughout some districts within the city, so they are not prohibited. You can put new mobile home parks within the city limits. We have not had one of those for over 10 years. New mobile home parks just nationwide really just are not a thing that you're seeing much anymore of for a series of reasons that I will not get into tonight. We do have more modern zoning codes that were updated in 2010 related to our mobile home parks. In turn, that was part of that inspection process that we see here. Overall, those are in line with kind of best practices for how cities and communities manage mobile home parks within their own community. And also, as we continue to look at housing options and housing issues across the state, as well as within our city, we're starting to look at different ideas of how we can help mobile home parks and, simple things like just improving the quality like we're already doing, but also looking to the future of things like co-ops and other ways in which mobile home park owners can have an investment within the place where they live, providing for that kind of like long-term sustainability outside of investors, where mobile home parks are a great investment. And that's what we're seeing across the nation of investment companies buying these mobile home parks. And so we're very aware of the kind of what's happening within these areas, but it's definitely a component of our housing market within the city of Laramie. We've got a bullet point up here about the Urban Renewal Authority. Todd, I'm going to let you take that one then.
Absolutely. Over the past 14 months, the city of Laramie has established the Laramie Urban Renewal Agency. This group is a group that's been empowered by Statute 15101 that allows for the city through the Urban Renewal Agency to have certain powers. The most effective power in the state of Wyoming right now is tax increment financing, which is a huge concept to undertake, but basically it's built off property taxes. Development that has been stagnant has become slum or blight, which those terms are difficult to swallow when you're talking about your community, is taxed at a certain level. And when it goes into development, that tax level increases, that property tax level increases. What this does is allow developers and the city, the urban renewal agency, to use that additional property tax to help offset the cost of public improvements. And that public improvement could be facades and looks of the building, to sidewalks, to stormwater retention, city water and sewer extensions, a lot of pieces like that. That kind of flies at the current process to try to erode a property tax too. So it's kind of this wavering power that we're going to have as it moves through. The city has started its first project, its first plan on project, which is North 4th Street. We're also having some enhanced discussions just here lately on the Slade School property and urban renewal agency related to that area. So super excited about where we're headed with that. Just a little bit nervous about how the funding source is going to work as we move forward.
So jumping into kind of some of the other bullet points here, we've got city-owned land being pledged for new housing and public-private partnerships related to development of housing. I'm going to kind of group those together because they have some overlap. First off, the city of Laramie has consistently used city property to attract housing development within our community. We've seen senior housing and other types of housing go into the community simply because the city has provided discounts on land. We have we've incentivized the ability for housing to come to our community. Through those processes, we are also seeing, kind of specialized housing even in 4th Street. So Todd mentioned the North 4th Street property. This is our former Public Works facility, the former this building. But much nicer here. But with that though, with that project, we are starting to work on a more innovative process of a public-private partnership in which we recently went out for an RFQ to attract a housing developer to develop the property for us. The city early on has recognized we are not in the development game. We are not probably the best to develop even our own property sometimes, but that's okay. But I think recognizing that and getting people in that can do it for us and provide the housing and provide whatever that housing is in our community, we think is important. And we're doing that on 4th Street. So those are just a couple examples there. Developing a fee waiver and credit program is another way we are trying to incentivize and get developers into our community that provide housing. Fees throughout the development process obviously are part of that kind of financial stack that the property owner or developer has to figure out before they'll move forward with a project. If we can find ways as a community to either reduce that or delay it or waive it or provide credit if they meet certain standards or meet certain types of housing requirements, we think that it might be another opportunity for us, another tool in our toolbox to provide housing in our community and to try to reach that 4,000 unit number that we were talking about by 2030.
And that will need council approval. We think we'll be bringing that forward in a few months.
Regulation reform. I think not to be confused with the Regulatory Reduction Task Force, but local reform. Our community, Laramie, has been kind of on the forefront, I think, of housing change in the state. Going back to 2018, as it says in the slide, many staff members began involved in kind of a statewide effort, although very focused, to kind of look at housing from like a critical viewpoint, not only from like a planning and zoning perspective, but from a building permit perspective, as well as just globally and regionally of how housing is changing in our state as well as in our region. And with that, that back in 2018, we started to identify kind of trends that were happening in Laramie that we were seeing elsewhere. And often Wyoming, Laramie were a little bit behind the ball. And so sometimes that can work to our advantage, thankfully. We were able to look forward and start to make changes prior to even COVID, where housing reform was being made. So these were things like changes to parking standards, changes to our lot sizes in our zoning districts, height requirements, modifications that change setbacks to allow people to use more of their property. All these things were done kind of before they became trendy, which we believe is really helping Laramie. We have not stopped those efforts. Just as recently as last year, we had a whole nother package of changes come through related to housing. And we are currently, just within my office, just the other day, started working on our next package that we're going to bring forward with our new council as they come on in the new year to continue to try to improve our regulations so that we can be flexible, but still protect the values that our community has expressed and the different planning efforts and the things like that that they have experienced over the years. And then the last one, streamlined application processes. In that process, so back in 2010, the city of Laramie adopted a development code process. Through that, although we hear sometimes that it was not the best process, it actually provided significant flexibility to staff to allow for developments to occur without having to go through processes, often going to city council for approvals. Unfortunately, those timelines when you had to go to city council were very problematic. We also now, just even with within the last 2 months, have adopted an online permitting system. This allows for a contractor, while they're sitting on their job site, maybe waiting for material, to apply for additional applications, go through the processes that they need to apply, and not even have to come into the office. As we work through that, it's not perfect yet, but it's actually a pretty good system, and we're starting to get through to a point where we're starting to get a little bit more efficient, and we think that that's going to really help our development community, just kind of modernization, as there was expressed in one of the earlier slides. So I think you were going to take the other side of the slide, if I remember right, Janine?
Yeah, sure was.
Yes.
We recognize and have been talking throughout this past year with various local groups that are working on housing. We recognize that leasing standards in mobile homes are seemingly an issue. And one of the council's priorities this year was to be mindful of and maybe consider ways to better understand the terminology people use, I think, when they speak to you, your constituents, is predatory leasing practices that may be becoming more prevalent in the community due to, as Derek said, huge national conglomerates coming in and purchasing mobile home parks. And so in doing a little bit of research into that, I'll be honest, I don't know that anyone on city staff has the expertise to really understand what is or is not a predatory leasing practice in a mobile home park. We hear the stories too. We get calls in my office, people upset, about what's happening and the fact that they're losing their mobile home or having to move out because of what they describe to us. Sure sound predatory, but I'm certainly not an expert on that. In the little bit of research that we have been able to do, though, it's come to my attention that there are state statutory paradigms that deal with establishing standards for owners of mobile home parks and how they regulate lease rates and that sort of thing. So I'm not suggesting that necessarily as a policy priority, but I have seen where other states use strategies like that, and it seems to be targeted at the concerns that the city council had, which really are, I don't believe there is any statutory authority for the city to deal with it that I know of. And so we're kind of putting it, I'm kind of offering that maybe, we're pushing it back across the table and saying, is there a way that the city can work with the state to put in place some statutory regulations that might be helpful at the local level? And do you guys want to add anything?
No, I mean, I think that's a pretty accurate, I suppose, statement on the options the council has. I mean, it's quite limited for things that we can do. But I do think the council is open to them if you all know of anything maybe useful. Carly?
Can you maybe are you talking about the leasing standards in terms of the lease that they have with the people renting the land that's under the home that they own?
Yes, I think
Okay.
that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
I can only speak from the point of someone who lived in one of Laramie's mobile parks for 7 years.
Yeah.
And so I'm a little limited, but yes, I mean, you don't own the land. And so then if they raise your rate or your rent, excuse me, it's often, you can't move the house. Like supposedly it's mobile, but it's not.
Yeah. So, yeah, no, the homes are not necessarily mobile. It costs $7,000 minimum to even have somebody consider it. Oftentimes it takes months to get them there. So one of the things that we're seeing in leases is that they have 30 days. So say they're evicted from the property, they have 30 days to move their home, which they can't necessarily afford to do so and sometimes physically can't. And if they don't do it within 30 days, then that company owns their house, which is super predatory, and they can evict people for any reason. One of the things I'm concerned about is retaliation to anybody that tries to advocate for themselves in any way. I've been in very intense, heated conversations with some of these mobile home park owners for things that they've done to tenants. And I know we've talked about people that have complained to the city about rental conditions. And so I don't know exactly what the state lever should be, but I think there needs to be one in how we protect people from retaliation from these companies. But I don't know, while we have legislative service office staff, I've called them and a lot of them are like, I don't know. So I'm hoping maybe the city attorney can talk to me or talk to us more specifically about some of the issues that have been coming up with renters and mobile home tenants and what the legal levers are. Ideally, it happens, I'll be honest, ideally, I think something has to happen through the city, whether in other states I've seen soft overlays of protection with like how much, I don't know, just different standards of lease agreements that can exist, but I don't know city ordinance law well enough to know what we can do there. So I think that's another in-depth conversation, and knowing that anything we do here at the city, if the state doesn't like it, we'll then retaliate and come back and bring a bill to try and squash you. Yeah, it's extremely complicated. Anyway, that was a long ramble of I need help. Help me help you.
Thanks, Carly. Ken?
Yeah, this is a fascinating conversation. I'm not sure there's a quick fix here, but there needs to be some kind of a fix because the problem of the out-of-state and multi-gigantic companies that own the land. I heard stories knocking on doors, campaigning this past time about people who've been evicted from their houses. They can't afford it because the rents have gone up so fast. They can't afford it anymore. So the solution that I heard about, how do we prevent that from happening? If we could get the tenants who own the homes to also have an ownership interest in the land through some kind of a co-op arrangement, so that there's no predatory landlord out there to jack your rent. If you raise the rent, you're raising your own rent. You're not going to do that. You're going to raise it enough just to make it go, but not anything. There's no profit to be had there. So having a nonprofit co-op of some sort owning the land to prevent make sure there's no incentive for these gigantic price rent hikes. How do we get to that spot? I don't know. I don't know that you can do that to the existing mobile home parks. But if there were other mobile home parks available with that model that can then offer homes at reasonable rents, we can outcompete the giants, right? So we build some of these new homes that where the ground rent is reasonable because the owners own the residents own that land through a co-op, and then if there's a demand for mobile home living, that's where people are going to go because the rents are cheaper. We outcompete the predators. That's not an easy solution. I don't know if there's a legal regime out there that allows that to happen yet, and if there's not, can we make one? So it's an idea. I mean, it's maybe kind of out there, but can we start working in that direction? Maybe that's just I'm brainstorming here, but I like the idea of giving the owners of the mobile homes an interest in the land underneath them.
Thanks, Ken. Carly?
That's happened in a couple circumstances, and I think it's tied to litigation. So actually, the company that owns mobile home parks here, Impact Community Manufactured Housing or something, they're called Impact, has been sued, and in the money that people have received or what they've received have been able to buy up those parks. But the issue is that these people don't have money sitting around to do a co-op to put their money together. I mean, I think ideally the city, and again, it still comes with the added problem of moving people, the people that are in the current situation, but the city and the county I'd like to see have some sort of shared owning of land where the rent doesn't have to go up if it's publicly owned. I don't know, I do know that one of the parks, Sunny Meadows, one of these companies, these predatory companies, offered $16 million to buy it. So they're basically dealing in unlimited amounts of money. And so you have right of first refusal in Wyoming, which you would have to force. That was part of what happened in these other parks. You have to force them to have to sell it. And then you get the right of first refusal, but you're still talking millions of dollars for these people that then have to organize themselves and go to a bank and get a loan together. And we don't have a bank right now in Wyoming that's willing to do that. So I think that the most viable option would be, can we figure out some way for the future for Laramie to start having something in place? But I don't know what the answer is. I certain, I'll say the words rent control, but I don't know how politically viable that is. And can you only target mobile home communities? I don't know.
City Manager.
I think Councillor Newman was in the queue. I was just going to mention, I like I said, I don't know. I don't feel that I have expertise to speak meaningfully, but I will share that I did look at the Colorado Mobile Home Park Act, and it touches on some of these concepts you're raising. I just pulled up my notes again here. This is very brief, but it limits the number of times per year a park owner can raise rent. I don't know if the city has the authority to do that. Institutes a state oversight board that handles dispute and conflict resolution, which I thought was kind of interesting. Requires park owners to take care of common areas, utilities. We hear a lot about that, right? Because on their side of the meter, it's the park owners' infrastructure. But this is interesting. It gives the park residents 120 days to purchase their park if it's put up for sale. So 120 days for a co-op or something to form. And then it allows local governments from the state government, allows local government the first right of refusal on sales. So, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. So those concepts are clearly out there as, practices in regional communities. It's just we will need the city attorney to determine what latitude the city has or does not have under current statutes. Yeah.
Yeah, I've looked at the Colorado law. I mean, it would be ideal, but I'm looking at the legislature as well. So it's just going to take some organizing. I don't think it's undoable. I think that ultimately it's a populist idea to protect people from predatory companies that are coming from out of state and putting Wyoming families on the street. But it's going to take some education.
And likely organizing that exists outside of the mobile home park, right? Because there is the retaliatory piece of this as well. So it becomes incumbent on everybody around the mobile home park, not the...
Which I think our neighbors are willing to do. I think the people of Laramie and the people of Wyoming are also don't really have an appetite for that sort of thing. So,
correct. Yeah, I think you're right. Councilor Newman?
Not a question, a comment. I think we should have a town hall work session like we're doing now just on this. Because there's a lot that we could... If you saw my notes for today, it's kind of ridiculous, but it's all over the place. But I could write forever on this kind of stuff because I lived in mobile home parks and I know kind of the shady stuff. I lost a brand new house. It was like 2016, 2015. They jacked it up and I couldn't afford it. And I had, I think, 120 days to move it. And I didn't have $10,000, nor did nobody want to come and do it that fast. So I think a working relationship between council and you guys would be amazing. And I think, you know, city attorney and everybody else needs to be involved in this conversation because it is I didn't door knock this time, but just listening to everybody else, this is huge here in Laramie, and it's something that is on my radar that I want to do something in the next couple of years with.
Thank you, Counselor. I think I'll just sign the next council up for that conversation. I'm sure you will. All right.
Closing out this topic,
Please.
the other thing, and I've mentioned this at many of the housing advocates meetings in the last year, and I think it's even been discussed to some degree, but there's the potential for the state to develop a grant, possibly a loan program that could help local governments and private developers come together and partner to fund arterial infrastructure, right? Which is a huge upfront cost for developers that keeps them from developing housing. And then, of course, once they do, they pass on that cost into the price of the homes. There's probably other things as well. If anyone would like to talk more about that, I'm happy to talk about it offline. And I have had some conversations with the Business Council. I will say that the Business Council has told us that they will fund arterial infrastructure for housing. We've been talking with private developers over the last year. We have 2 or 3 projects kind of in queue that we've been trying to help them flesh out and determine if they might be a viable candidate to test the Business Council's potential as it currently exists. I just am not clear if there's sufficient funding in that program to fund arterial infrastructure in the long term. So.
Please, Trey.
So, yeah, just a quick update on this. This week, Dan Dorsch, I don't know what his title is anymore. He sent around a survey. So there is $5 million in state money to help with infrastructure for affordable housing. The application rollout has been stalled because the grant office has been slammed with closing out ARPA funds. And so they want to take to the SLIB board a proposal on how to best test and utilize the 5 million, knowing that it's not going to go very far. So Dan just sent out a survey. If you, Janine, didn't get it, I'll forward it to you with ideas of how to best leverage that 5 million to take to SLIB. So that's one thing. And then the other thing that the Wyoming Community Development Authority is working on, and Dan is part of this, is a concept for a housing investment fund. So a pot of money that could be granted out or at a low interest or zero interest loan to local governments to assist with housing. So the white paper on that right now is being circulated to the Business Council for feedback on ROI, on like how much money would need to be set aside for seed funds to then generate enough interest for grants and loans. And then what would the loan structure need to be to like continually feed back into the investment fund? So that's out there. I'm hoping that it's ready, that we have something in front of us at the end of December or early January to respond to. I guess the other thing is the Wyoming Community Development Authority is going to do an online free presentation of the statewide housing plan here soon-ish. So those 3 things are in the hopper somewhere.
Thanks, Trey. Please.
If I could just make one suggestion, I will look for that. Thank you. And I did submit information to the grant office a couple of months ago. This sounds fresher. I wonder if there's any will to, at the state level, as you develop grant and loan programs for things like this, to take into, like, provide those grants and loans on like a sliding scale fee in terms of affordability metrics, because affordability for Laramie is really huge. Like, we have a lot of people in this community who can afford to buy the $350,000+ homes, but we have a whole bunch of people who can't. And so I'd love to see some metrics built into a state program that would maybe depoliticize the award of those funds and focus them toward the communities with the most need in terms of resident incomes and also the strength of local government revenues, right? Because the reason that Todd and I can't just show up in front of council and say, hey, let's give this developer $5 million to build their arterial infrastructure is because we have some of the lowest per capita income in the state. I happen to know there are other communities who have sufficient income that they're also lobbying you all for more lenient financing policies where they can invest. They have so much money, they have money to invest and earn income on. And so for those communities, maybe their city manager and assistant city manager can go to council and contribute $5 million to build housing. So I'd love to see some local metrics woven in that would target the housing to the communities and the counties where people need it most and the governments are least able to afford it.
Thanks, Jean.
That's my lobbying.
Thanks, Mayor. I think I just want to add the importance of delaying infrastructure cost. I think, I'm sure developers, if they were in the room, they'd say, yeah, let's pay for our infrastructure. They would love that. But it is just important if we can figure out a way to delay the cost of that infrastructure. Infrastructure is the highest cost for all types of development, even commercial development. And what we consistently hear is even though they know the road needs to be there, they need the big road because it's going to bring the traffic to their new commercial center or their apartment complex or whatever. Front-ending that financing is very difficult for them. Even if they can find a low interest or no interest loan and then pay that back later, seemingly what we're hearing locally in Laramie is that is very doable and it helps them finance a project and takes that risk that they normally have to put up at the front end. And so just quick developer speak, but I think it's important that it's not necessarily a handout here that's being asked for, but figuring out a way to delay that cost on the upfront to get the project going. So.
Thank you for adding that. All right.
Okay, last slide. You guys asked for the city's interest in the potential use of the $0.25 for economic development as a way to, what it says under there is sort of make up for any decrease in direct distribution. This timeline shows you the timeline for renewal of our current 2 pennies of local option tax. So and of course, why does this matter? Because if we were going to take a proposal forward for a new $0.25 for economic development, we'd want to be thoughtful about the timing that the council and the county commissioners would use to put this in front of the voters. We know we have the specific purpose tax renewal election coming up. By our best guesstimate in Jennifer's office and speaking with the county treasurer in May of 26. And then in November of 26, the lodging tax will be up for a 4-year renewal, as will the general purpose penny. So I don't know what interest there is because the council haven't talked about it, but this timeline would help inform, if there is interest, the timing of taking something like that forward. And that's all I have.
Thank you, City Manager. All right. Any comments here at the end of the meeting? I would thank you all for hanging till the end, but also for just being here.
Take food.
Oh, take some food with you, please. Eat on us tomorrow. But thank you all, and thank you for serving in what will assuredly be a very fun legislative session. We're all here behind you, supporting how we can. It's a pleasure. All right. I guess with that, folks, we'll take public comment on the work session. Seeing no public comment, we are adjourned.